Barrack Street could be considered the heart of old Waterford, and real old stock, to use an old expression, which means an awful lot in the people of my time. Real old stock, decent people, and that was it, Barrack Street. Well, Barrack Street would be the heart of it.
It was a lovely street. It was a street full of character and characters. Great Christian people lived in that street.
The origin of the name Barrack Street, of course, obviously, it's because of the existence in the street of two military barracks. The infantry barracks and then the artillery barracks at the top of what is now Carthages Avenue. Of course, we were a strong garrison town, and there were major garrisons. And in the Irish, it's on Cursa Fada, the long course. Now, they must have preceded Barrack Street.
But the very old name for it is Faha Road, or the Faha, which translated from the Irish means a green. And indeed, some of the older maps you will see this referred to back in the 1700s as the common green. If you translate it from the Irish, it means the Faha, which is the green of the Stokeen of the barley stooks. And you know, when they got it, the barley up to fairly recent times, they had it in what was called a stook. So it's essentially, this is where the people of Waterford city grew their crops, because they obviously couldn't grow it within the city.
Barrack Street is a great street. I suppose it was the last shopping street before you got up into the original new suburbs of Ardnarania and Congress Place and Griffith Place. You know, so it was always a great shopping street. Now, small shops, but then they were the only kind of shops you had then.
When Mrs. Tracy had a shop at the top of the street, she sold sweets up there, homemade sweets. Now, a JCB wouldn't break the sweets, they were so hard, you know. So you're guaranteed to get the suckability in them was fantastic. You could be sucking it for 2 days and you might only take it down, diminish it slightly, you know.
There was an old sweet shop factory at the end of Barrack Street. They used to call it the Money Ball. And they used to make little roundy money balls, they called them. They'd be a coin in it if you were lucky enough to get it.
And they were pink. And inside you could get a little ticket. And if you were very lucky, you would get a threepenny bit, as they called it at the time, or you might get sixpence. And everyone from Bangin, they were hard. And from Bangin, off the side of the wall was all pink at the side. And you'd be weighing and you might get nothing at all. Remember, you'd be weighing in one and that's heavier than that, you know.
One of the most famous characters of any street, never mind say Barrack Street, he was a Protestant bishop called Daddy Curtis. And he and his daughter used to work down there with nothing, only natural herbs.
Oh, there was Daddy Curtis. Daddy Curtis, yeah. This man was a herbalist. He was a herbalist. And no matter what you had wrong with you, when we were kids, if we were off out the country, as we did at that time, you'd often see this man and he'd be picking all the herbs from the earth.
Often you see him going out with either a dog or a goat pulling a lovely little truck behind it, and they're walking out to collect herbs and collect flowers.
And he had 10 cats in the shop, and I had to clean it every Monday morning.
How much were you getting a week done with Daddy Curtis?
£0.50 a week.
£0.50 a week.
Big
money, right? For a many hours.
That was good money.
It was good money, wasn't it?
6 days a week.
6 days a week.
Yeah. Little small man he was. Little small man, the dapper man, you know what I mean? Very fast on the feet, and the wife was the same. Two small people.
He always wore a white coat. And
he did, yeah.
Hair
he had white hair.
Hair like myself.
Yeah.
To outsiders not from the street, he would have been a sort of an eccentric man who was doing something that, you know, might not too fashionable, but deep down he was a religious man that put God first and foremost.
Other side of Mount Sion, there was Matty Nolan's, which is now the rice, or is it restaurant and guest house. Matty Nolan was there, Matty had a vegetable shop, but it was also a refuge for rebels, because fellas on the duck from school, or the mooch as we used to call it, went into Matty, and you were cosseted, you were put under the counter. Matty had talked to them for the rest of the time. Brother, come and get in quick. And the brother come in. Matty, see any lads around here? No, none of them came in this morning. Well, they came in by Dilliska, all right, but Dilliska should have had as a seaweed, an edible seaweed. They came into by Dilliska, and one or two bought apples. You have none of them here? No, none of them here at all. I wouldn't dream of keeping moochers. Brother, go off and we'd have resume the conversation with Matty, but you paid for the following day and you went in.
And then there was a pub, now that I think of it, Batterberries.
Oh,
Now,
God,
the very,
yes.
very old
Yeah.
Batterberries. And people would fall out of that place every night. I mean, kids would just stand around to watch them coming out. Well, it wasn't controlled like it is today. And people...
Fellas now, after the weekend, we get paid. Years ago, at that time, we get paid for Friday and Saturday, you know. And they'd have a good weekend. And they'd be sick of a Monday. And they would sing-song here on Monday after, you know. And they go back to work then, they would never think to the following Friday then.
The pubs, no women were allowed in. There was a little thing called the snog.
That's right.
A little passageway in a seat. And I used to go in with the grandmother, and she'd have a tin point under her shawl. And she'd bang on the door and this slide would go up, and your man would say, "Yes, Mrs. Allen." Or she'd say, "Tim Boy, is the old fella inside?" "Oh, he is, Mrs. Allen. He's at the end of the bar. Don't tell him I'm here. Give us sixpence worth of beer." And he'd slide it out, and she pushed under her shawl and home with her again.
And when you say sixpence worth of beer, you put in the tin canners, or what would it?
Yeah.
And he'd fill up that.
And he'd fill up that, yeah. They
And,
weren't allowed, the women, you see, into the pubs. They weren't to be seen.
Yeah, this street is actually a microcosm of Waterford itself, because I'm sure there are other villages and towns and cities indeed that have a street or streets that Waterford people can identify with. Now, whilst you might think that we should be identified with O'Connell Street and with the Quay and with major thoroughfares like that, this street is where a lot of people in Waterford can identify with, because it was the gateway to the sporting events that happened in the north of the city.
Brother Malone was a great friend of Charlie Weir, the great Charlie Weir, the great hurling fullback, who was the big man in the Erdenzone club. Erdenzone had nothing only the senior team, which was among the best individual club teams in the country. And Brother Malone approached Charlie and asked him, he said he had a group of boys who on leaving school had nowhere to go, nowhere to continue their hurling. And he asked them if he and Erdenzone would take over these. And Charlie didn't see that he could do that. The result was the formation of Mount St. Club. Had Charlie Weir agreed to take them over, very likely there would be no Mount St. Club today.
They had good hurlers around, but they hadn't, the Weirs added greatly to it. And they were good and strong in the 30s. We got to an All-Ireland in 1938 or 39, beaten by a pint by Dublin. And that was great, because Waterford had never got that far before. I mean, they're always good, but like the present day, they were good, but they're short a few players always. They never had enough. But they had great individual hurlers, the likes of Charlie Weir, John Keane, Jim Weir.
A great legend of sport, Paddy Code, lived in Dial Street. Willie was his brother, and he had another brother, but Willie and Paddy played in Ireland. Willie played for Waterford. Paddy went on to form the nucleus of one of the greatest clubs ever in Ireland, Shamrock Rovers. And his young fellas, he picked all these young kids to play for him. They were known as kind of the Irish Busby Babes. All of them attained full international status. Davy Welsh was another great soccer player. He lived on the terrace above. Davy Welsh was the only Catholic to ever play for Linfield Football Club in the north of Ireland. One of the big Birmingham clubs came after him, West Bromwich Albion, and they signed him up for something like £7,000 or £8,000, which was colossal money. You'd have bought 7 or 8 houses down in Barrack, maybe 12 houses in Barrack Street for that kind of money. And incidentally, his goal-scoring records in Linfield Football Club still stand to this day. And every Sunday the Waterford were playing a home game. There could be anything up to 600 people standing up there waiting for the Barrack Street band to march up. Then they'd march out behind them, out to the soccer field in Kilcoen, and they'd march home behind them, because it wasn't a journey then anymore. So it's time for talking and getting a bit of physical exercise in, and you didn't realise the distance you were walking. Of course, we never took cognizance of the effect this was happening on the poor fellas in the band who were having to play all this music the whole time, you know.
And it was fabulous. you'd walk out there, then you wouldn't feel it at all. Everybody used to follow him down the road and off out. And apart from the music out there, it was a very easy way of walking out behind the van. You wouldn't feel yourself doing it. That was the tradition for years and years.
I remember the Barrack Street Band under Mr. Flannery, and they lived literally opposite here again. They had a band room, and they had always attracted youngsters into the band. They were known as the Barrack Street Band then, and they progressed through that, then to become the Barrack Street Brass and Reed Band, then the Barrack Street Concert Band.
I remember hearing the story. My grandfather died in 1947 or so, and I heard saying that the family had to go over and ask the band to tone things down a bit while he was dying.
Well, there was always bands in Waterford, and the carnival, you see, had a lot to do with that. The carnival started just before the war, and the first couple were held on the courthouse grounds.
There's a man over there called Father Farrell. He came from behind me there. Father Farrell was a priest, a great driving force, and a man who followed on for Father Power, who started the idea of a carnival. And if they had the carnival going and got enough amusements and things into it, they could get the money to build the church up in Luke Wadding Street, which is still known affectionately to Water people as the new church, despite the fact there's been 4 different churches built after it. It was known as the new church. So they held the carnivals down in the courtyard, or the courthouse. Now the problem with the courthouse was this: anybody could get into the courthouse for nothing, but you couldn't get into the military barracks. There was only one entrance in and one entrance out.
I remember a fellow diving off a tower into a little basin full of water. A little, wouldn't be any bigger than a bat. He used to dive off a pillar 100 feet high into this thing. They had things like that down there, you know. It's very exciting. And then it was moved up to the barracks for years and years. It used to be held there for years and years. And there'd be great concerts there every night.
And then the amusements, Perks used to do the amusements. You'd have the Wall of Death. Now to young kids, boys particularly, the Wall of Death was something else, because what it meant is a fellow going around on motorbikes in around a huge big circle. You know, centrifugal force kept them up. We didn't think that. We thought it was pure skill. And everybody wanted to be one of them when we came out of the barracks, you know. Then they'd have the rag, which they call the rag, was held on the final day. And the rag would attract people from all over the city. And the rag was that you dressed up in something of the time.
That's where the girls would meet the fellas, like, you know. Yeah. They used to have kind of a outdoor tent, as we call it now, and they'd be all dancing and everything in there. And you'd have to be a certain age to be left in, but we'd be going over, maybe looking in the split, like, you know.
It was where all couples went, because you either went out the country, got stuck in a ditch to court, you weren't allowed inside your own house, so you had to go out. So we used to all go down to Barrack.
Well, the barracks was actually begun construction in 1799, just after the 1798 rebellion. And it had a checkered history right up to the War of Independence and the truce. It was then taken over by the Free State. In later years then, it was almost the domain exclusively of the FCA and the Slua Mirror.
There was the maritime inscription, that's now known as the Slua Mirror. The maritime inscription consisted mostly of fellows who were interested in sailing and who knew a bit about the sea, so they joined this maritime inscription. There was a lot of gags used to have about them. When these fellows are paraded in uniform, everyone would say that it was the only navy in the world where you went home to your dinner on a bicycle. But we had no ships, we had nothing. Every man in the LDF was issued with a Lee Enfield rifle that dated back to the Boer War. Every rifle is dated as well as numbered. You had a bayonet from the First World War, and you had 25 rounds of ammunition, full stop. That's 25 bullets. That's all you had. We didn't have any equipment. And neutrality was important, that we defended.
We had a plane crash in Barrack Street. And the plane crash in Barrack Street, it consisted of a light aircraft that the British Army, the Royal Army Air Corps I think it was called, used to use between military barracks. As you see, any troops that came to Waterford never came by road, they came by sea. They either came from Dublin by sea or by Cork by sea, which meant that straight away there was no one going to be killed, there was no one going to be ambushed or anything like that, so you could move them around like that. And but the way they got the letters and the information to small items to Waterford would be, a plane would take off and swoop over the camps that were down there. Kilkenny would have been one, Clonmel down to Waterford, and then bang, pull her up, get up to a bit of height, then dive down over the military barracks, and the co-pilot or whoever it would be would throw out a package of reinforced stuff with all the letters and whatever he had into the barracks. So as he did, the pilot then pulled her back, and suddenly the plane went from went a chuk, and he barely got over the gate, and he got up over the gate and then slammed into the top of Batterberry's pub. Everyone had a pub or a shebeen of some description where they could cater for the needs of the occupying forces, because these fellas had money to spend, number one, and number two, if they were going into Barrack Street, they weren't going too far away from the home base, and they could drink their brains out over here.
And it was an awful loss when the British Army moved out of the barracks, of course, because the Irish Army only ever had a very small garrison down there, and they wouldn't make up for all the business that was lost by these soldiers who drank all their money and spent all their money down there.
For recreation, for gambling, the British Army troops off duty would come across to the now entrance to Ballybricken Church, which is at the top of, in brackets, 5 Alley Lane, and they would play a game of skittles called fives. So instead of having 8 skittles, they had 5 skittles. So they were going across to play fives, and just for big money. There might be a week's wages each of them might have invested in this game. And there's many a time that the constabulary at the time, the Royal Irish Constabulary, would have broken this up.
We have 3 straight roads, the only 3 straight roads in the old city, and they are Military Road, self-explanatory. There's Morrison's Road, which is known as Artillery Road, that's its own name, and Lower Yellow Road was Infantry Road. So the Infantry Road took you to the infantry barracks, and the Military Road took you up to the Artillery Road, which connected with the artillery barracks at the top of Barrack Street. I remember playing as a kid in the artillery barracks. That was blown up in 1922, during the siege of Waterford, July 1922. And what actually happened was there was the Free State were attacking from Mount Misery, and they had 2 artillery pieces. They say 1, but my research shows 2. One was high explosive, the other was incendiary shells. And one of the shells landed on the barracks, and it was a direct hit on the magazine. And the magazine blew up, the barracks went on fire. And it was burned down, all that was left there was a shell, a very dangerous shell, but we used to play cowboys and Indians that had come from school. So the corporation acquired it, took it over, and built Cassidy's Avenue houses on it. They demolished it and built the houses. I think that was 1938, I'm not too sure of the exact date, but it was before the war. And it was, we lost a place for playing.
The girls were different. They had the ropes around poles for swings and that. You know, you wouldn't see a pole with a rope hanging out.
And someone swung you around, and more often than that, they forgot to catch you. Look at that cat. They forgot to catch you in the middle of everything.
Bang off.
You're lucky you came out alive, because they would start chatting to someone else. They'd forget they were there to catch you, because they would swing
around.
Yes, and you'd be going all around a coil around the tree, and of course you're waiting for someone to catch you, and next thing you could bang your face and everything.
We hadn't much time for games. We'd play football and hurling under the lights in the night time. And I have a criminal record for playing under the lights. A guard caught me and I was fined £0.5. There'd be silent cycling guards. That was the only crime that was committed at the time. Silent cycling guards go around, try to pounce on you.
But back in the old war days, I mean, to get a ball was a big thing. You know what I mean? You wouldn't get and often the rubber balls you'd have might tear. I know a friend of mine, his father was a tailor, and he'd stuff the ball with bits of cloth and sew it up and we'd be playing with that, no bouncing it anymore. But if you got a belt of it, you know you were alive, you know what I mean? Big thick ball hit you in the face. But no, you made do with the circumstances of that time.
We'd get bicycle wheels were very important because bicycle wheels, you played a game, or we played a game with bicycle wheels. We got a wheel, a piece of stick, and you put it along the road in front of you. You called it nacing, Naasing, nacing, racing, a corruption of the word racing. And you naced your bike home, and actually you could run twice as fast if you were nacing it, because you wouldn't be tired. You were concentrating on keeping the wheel at the centre of the road, you know.
And you went in to see, when you were a child, you went in to see everyone who died. How terrible was that? And you went in to see everyone, you said a little prayer. You weren't a bit afraid or anything, it was kind of a little novelty.
And we got biscuits and we got lemonade, but that's all we went in for. We didn't pray. I'm sure we probably knelt down and said a prayer.
What was quite popular, if that's the word, back then when I was in primary school in Downsign, just next door, was that my fellow classmates used to go coming into the funeral home to have a look at the dead bodies who'd be reposing, of course, at the time in our funeral home. So they'd all sneak in, of course I'd go in with them, tentatively open the door and peek in. Some wouldn't go in, and some would walk in maybe a foot or two and run out again, but it was something you don't see anymore.
And then you had the crying women.
Right, yeah, tell us about them.
Yeah, sixpence. You buy 4 of them.
No, I was never at a funeral
they were,
where
Nanny
they were.
Arden had them, yeah.
No, I never.
And they'd be half drunk anyway.
And you'd pay them the sixpence.
Sixpence.
They'd come along and they'd cry for you
Yeah.
at the funeral.
Yeah.
And would they have certain prayers, they'd say? Or?
Well, they probably did made up prayers of their own. If I know them, I can imagine.
But there was a name on them. There was the name.
There was
for
a.
them.
Oh, I forget. The Shawneens or something, wasn't it?
I don't know. There was a name.
Something like that anyway, but they did a good job. But it was the done thing that people cried and roared, and the louder they cried and the further they were heard, it was a good week.
The politics of your parents in Waterford, when I was growing up, determined the school you went in. No, a royalist or pro-British went to De La Salle. A Republican went to Mount Sion. It was as simple as that. There was historical reasons for it. The Christian Brothers were a legal organisation, so they got nothing from the state. De La Salle were brought here by a bishop, a Dr. Power, who hated the Christian Brothers, and he wanted their influence curbed, so he brought in the De La Salle Brothers. And they were given a Protestant grammar school, free and gratis, as their first school by the British government. They were also paid.
The brothers existed for generations without participating in the national school system as operated by the British. One of the reasons being that it was required that on the visit of an inspector, all statues visible in the school would be removed or covered. The brothers never accepted that.
Now, when the school inspector was going around, remember he was a government appointee. When the school inspector was going around, statues were removed from the classroom in De La Salle. The crest here, strange enough, over Christian Brothers Monastery is the De La Salle crest. And at the time the monastery was being built, the brother superior here at the time insisted that the Christian Brothers were actually an offshoot of the De La Salle Brothers, which is absolutely incorrect. So he insisted on the De La Salle crest being put on over the door. Now it's the only monastery, the only Christian Brothers monastery that has a De La Salle crest. Rice was illegal, and was illegal for many, many years. It was illegal until the native government was set up. They never got a penny from the state. They were illegal because under the Act of Union of 1800, no new religious order could be founded. Rice started 1802, so he was outside the pale the whole time. He did his own thing. He did his own form of education. There is no rebel that I know of like him. He also arranged that every boy attending school would have a reasonably full stomach, because, to quote Rice, an empty stomach is an empty brain. And he maintained if your stomach was empty, your brain couldn't function because it was concentrating on the stomach. So you got a half loaf of bread and a cup of milk, mug of milk every morning, if you didn't have a breakfast. And that went on for well over a century in Mount Sion.
During the war, for people who had no father, right? They had a little scone and a small little bottle of milk. And I applied for it, because my father died when I was a year and a half, so I presumed I had no father. I told me I was getting the free milk, she was going to kill me. Like, I wasn't, they meant poor people who hadn't a father, you know what I mean?
My father had a constant job, so I had shoes. But majority in my class went to school in barefooted in the summertime and in many cases the winter.
If your shoes needed mending, it was common practice to mend them with the tire of a bicycle. And when you came out of these, you were bouncing along 3 foot tall walking on these tires. But they lost it, and they were good. But I tell you one thing, the guys who had no shoes, their feet were as good as leather. They were able to run down over cobblestones and everything, didn't seem to feel any pain. Whereas if I took off my shoes and you'd be feeling a prickle here, you know, they got quite used to it.
There was a shop next to Mount Sion, which was like Aladdin's Cave, Bridgie Welch's. It was part of the school now.
It would be about where the Mount Sion Hall is now. And I mean, she just served every schoolboy that ever passed through Mount Sion up to when it was knocked down. But she had sweets, everything inside, and a barrel of paraffin.
The shop was lit with gas. It was an explosion waiting to happen. The most dangerous shop I was ever in my life. Only afterwards I found out it was dangerous. At the time I didn't think it was, but it was gas lit, very, very dim light, and a huge barrel of paraffin oil up at one end. You smelled the paraffin oil the minute you went in. So people bought paraffin oil for their lamps because a lot didn't have electricity, and 9 times out of 10 the taste of the sweet was impregnated with paraffin oil. So you had a cocktail.
I'd say most people who went to school in Mount Sion can still get that smell of their nose when you went into the shop.
Now, Bridgie Welch used to sell a cigarette and a match for a penny to all the fellas going to the secondary school inside Mount Sion.
If you hadn't the price of a full cigarette, she'd sell you half of one. Sell somebody else the other half. Cut it in halves. Yeah. Very accommodating.
And of course, the big thing was to be able to smoke then. If you could smoke, you were after making it, you know. So they'd get the cigarette and they'd get the match and they'd light it up. And where would you say they'd all sit? They used to sit on 50 gallons of paraffin oil. There was a big paraffin oil tank in there, smoking their brains out, little realising they could have obliterated Barrack Street. Never mind, say Bridgie Welch's.
But then again, there was nothing wrong with cigarettes then, you know. I mean, there were none of this cancer business that we hear now, you know. It was just considered a dirty habit and it cost you money, so therefore you shouldn't do it. But health never came into it.
And to the break from the school as well, you know, you wouldn't want to be in the schoolyard just playing, so you got out to Bridgie Welch's for a smoke if you smoked, or maybe we just called me Halfpenny Square toffee.
That Halfpenny Square was a status symbol, because if you had a Halfpenny Square in your mouth, you were the king. And you're not going to believe this, but nowadays they talk about hygiene. If something falls on the ground, don't pick that up, there could be germs on it. The big thing you did when you had a Halfpenny Square, someone said, "Can I have a suck off your square?" And you took it out of your mouth and you handed it to them, and they went, sucked it for as much as they could, you know. Then they handed you back your square.
But as the fellow said one time, there was eating and drinking in him. You know, I put it into your mouth and you could have a good half an hour to an hour sucking this thing, you know. Dare you do it in school, because if you were asked a question you couldn't answer with the Halfpenny Square in your mouth.
Now, Edmund Rice wanted to extend his school, so he wanted that piece of land. And he bid for it, and he bid against the bishop, who was an autocratic villain by the name of Hussey. Hussey was so important to the British they gave him a military guard of honour when he was being consecrated above in Dublin. During the penal days. Shouldn't have happened, but they did it. That'll tell you how fond they were of Hussey. So Rice outbid him and built his school there.
I had, through my family, a reverence for him and what he stood for at a time when the brothers themselves tended to tuck him into the background and to not. You see, he had been a married man. He is the father of a child, and that didn't fit in with the Catholic concept of those days. And sure, it's true of many founders of religious congregations over the centuries that people were married and went into religion and all of that.
We buried him up in the grounds of the monastery. Since then, we've moved him around a couple of times.
We used to go down, they used to have a procession down there. And it used to be a lovely little church, lovely little grey old stone. And that's right, they moved him 3 times.
He was taken out of the mausoleum, some people remember the mausoleum, and he was taken up into the monastery, into his old bedroom. And he reposed there for a couple of months while the church was being built. And then he was taken in procession from that room down into an open air mass in the grounds. Mount Sion decided to build a new chapel a couple of years ago, and we took the coffin, took him out of the church on Barrack Street, and we brought him into our premises here, and we kept him here for a couple of months.
Edmund Rice employed a baker to bake bread every morning so that the boys could get a slice of bread or whatever it was, but the bakery is there, restored exactly as it was in his day, even with the ovens.
Most people went to the shop, not necessarily for the type of bread we associate nowadays, but because many women baked at home. But things like blaz, for instance, I mean, it would have been a huge trade in blaz, you know?
We're connoisseurs of the blah.
Oh yeah, we always had the blaz.
I saw it for an old penny.
Well, Hickey's is down there, they had one bakery. But Welch's now had another bakery in Ballybricken. And
Bill Wall had one over here.
Yeah. But there was only one in Barrack Street. That's Hickey's, it's still there now. That's down in the middle of the Barrack Street now.
They come in here and they look for soft, crusty, but the one with get maize kind of have in-betweens. So whatever an in-between is, not soft or not crusty.
You'd hear people in the morning if you were up there, 3 crusty and two other ones, 2 of the floury ones. Some people love them floury. You know. What my Margaret Jerry do, they pull the inside out of all the soft stuff, and they butter or put the meat in, whatever they're going to put in, like, you know.
Well, the origin, I suppose, is steeped in mystery. Some people associate it with the Huguenots, and some people say that the word blah is just a corruption of the word blanc, the French word meaning white, and the white flour and that. So, but having said that, they are undeniably a very, very Waterford delicacy.
Machinery is taking over everything then. We're still doing the old way, and Ford and as they're selling more and more, we're eventually going to have to go into a kind of a process thing. Look at the demand, you know, that kind of thing.
So vaguely now you hear about relish and steak blaz. In reality, that never happened up to maybe 5 or 6 years ago. The Celtic Tiger, the Ross started putting all sorts of stuff into them.
I wouldn't eat a lot of them now. I might eat one now, like, you know. It could be weeks. Sometimes I go up to Mary and I get 2 off her. And I might need 2 in for another month, like, you know, that way. But they are lovely, like.
Although, to the saying at one time, people say, she's a proper blah face. That wasn't a very nice compliment. French flat face or a blah face.
There was an enigmatic, indeed an eccentric man that lived up there called Martin Hunt. Now Martin Hunt was in the, he was a single man. People would say unkind things about his mental health, but actually he was a good guy, and he was in the construction corps in the Irish Army during the Second World War. So that was his he had been out when it was wanted, you know, and he was mad about hurling. He never went any place without a hurley. And he could be walking down the quay and you see him down the clock tower and he baiting balls up there. And the tourists used to be taking photographs of Martin, you know.
He was playing the infinite GAA final, wasn't he? He used to walk around the streets with a hurley, a bandage on his head and ketchup on it.
He used to be always going on with his hurley and a Waterford top on him and a cap. And he'd be down letting on, he was on goal downtown. A favourite place of his was But he's back to the stock tower facing up Baron Stanley, and he'd be letting on he was on goal.
And he played the spoons away in a musical situation. And when he got a drink or two aboard, he said his name wasn't Martin Hunt at all. He says, I am Martin Huns. He straight away switched into German, you see.
Then there was Baldy Joe Murphy.
Oh, yes. That was a horrible thing to put on a man, wasn't it, to call him that? Yeah. He had a shop.
But that's what he went by.
He had a shop
just across
further
the
up
road
here.
there. And he sold everything. And then we had the meat shop at the corner there, Bunkers Hill.
There was another poor fella, and we used to call him. But the poor fella had some kind of a complaint. Monkey tricks, we used to call him. He used to be doing this up against the pole. Sure, the poor chap had some kind of an illness or something. But when I think of it, you know, we were so, with the innocence of us, you know.
There was a large Jewish community in Waterford that happened in the 30s and 40s. Now, unfortunately, and I say this in all honesty, they're gone. We have no Jews in Waterford. And it's very simple. Why? There was no Jewish girls to marry. Simple as that.
If you had something you couldn't flog, they'd buy it. And they'd buy it for something, which is the important thing. It doesn't matter, they bought it for something.
The Jew man, the Jew man was down here in the laneway down on the right, at Wolfson, his brother, I think his brother ran Evergreen. We would sell him if we could find lead or scrounge lead. We sold lead and copper to him.
People were getting rid of the old ranges they had in the houses. This is a range of the forerunner of the Yaga cooker, where you could put in coal and you could get massive stuff done on it. But these became unfashionable, so people started putting in new ones. So you brought it down to the Jew man, and he gave you money for it. And what you did, you waited till he went home and you opened the roof and went in and you took your thing back. So we were all the young fellas were mad getting in through the top, whipping stuff, and eventually they copped on to the fact that these fellas would come back. There must have been 20,000 houses in Waterford with ranges that weren't anything like it, you know. We're just robbing the stuff and bringing it back to them to get a couple of bob extra.
I can't really place him now. I was often in there, but I can't place what he looked like. You see, we'd have had more seen Daddy courses going up and down to school. I was living on Broad Street, so I passed the shop every day, going up and coming down and going back again. So you see him inside in the shop. So, you know what I mean? Whereas the Jew man was down the little lane off Barrack Street, you wouldn't have as much access to him unless you were going in to sell him something.
He had a beautiful daughter. Half the town were cracked about her. She was older than my generation, but half the town were cracked about her. And they had no hope of ever getting off with her or marrying her, because that's what they were very strict about, that the Jews. They had to marry into their own faith, you know.
Most of them came here to escape persecution in Russia. Their fathers would have came here. Russia, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, those countries, which Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia were under control of Russia. So Russia was very, very hard on Jews. And they made their way across Europe. And Ireland was a kind of a haven at the time. There was no persecution whatsoever. They settled in Cork, Limerick, Waterford and Dublin. They were the four major centres. Eventually some of them moved to Belfast, where they opened up various businesses.
You get characters every place, you know, and they were more innocent than anything, and money came into it, you know.
What do you mean money came into it?
Well, people had no money. Okay. I mean, money was terrible. I remember the woman I lived with only had 7 and 6 a week pension. That was their old age pension. And I remember going down to collect it one week and they said, we're sorry, we have to cut a shilling. They took a shilling off the 7 and 6. And when I went back up home, she bet me black and blue and said I was sticking to the shilling.
What, she thought you robbed it?
Thought I robbed. Couldn't believe that the government had taken it off it. You know.
There's more lanes down here at Barrack Street than they do at Albion, but they're all locked up.
Yeah, you had Butcher's Lane and then a tenement, and you had Jewman's Lane, which was Neve's Lane, was the proper name on it, and then Well Lane. Yeah, 3 different lanes.
Well, there were 3 different laneways.
Yeah.
Still call it Butcher's Lane, eh?
God, when you think of the lovely names down there. Wheelbarrow Lane was called Wheelbarrow Lane because you only get a wheelbarrow down it. 2 houses on either side.
There was a flag maker down Harrington's Lane, and there were hucksters and every occupation down in the lane.
All the lovely lanes that we had, and some people came out those lanes were brilliant.
Originally a lane down between the pub, which is now Ryan's, which was John Keene's originally. There was a lane down by the side of that called Pump Lane. And during the war and that, we had sawmills here, we cut our own timber. Another thing that was unique at the time was, when our sawmills, one of the things you manufactured was sawdust. So they got a small barrel, packed the sawdust into it, pushed a broomstick down to make a hole, and you burned that from the bottom, and the heat came up and you cooked on the top of the barrel. And people used to come down to get a bag of sawdust here regularly.
Will you ever forget the sawdust bins during the war?
Oh my God, sure, I think that's what killed my eyes.
You never heard of them, did you? Oh, it was a huge big galvanised barrel, and the men went down to different places and brought up sacks of this
Like
sawdust.
Morris's and all those places.
And they stuffed the bin with a big hole in the centre, which you set fire to, and that never went out. That went on week in and week out, and all the washing was piled up on that in a huge big boiler and boiled. The dinners was cooked on it.
And if you didn't cook on that, you were cooking over the open fireplace, or the range, which we have an original one inside.
Well, you'd miss all the little huckster shops that are gone now, the supermarkets that they're doing away with all them, you know. The only shop up in Barrack Street now, sure, is Bar, and just like a supermarket. All the little friendly shops that were run by families, you know, you could go in and have a chat, all that's gone.
I tell you, the people in them days were really friendly. They all used to talk to one another. People don't talk to one another anymore, don't think, you know. And you used to go in there to one another's houses. That's all finished, like, you know.
Yeah.
You never see a person going in. You never see a person's door open. People used to sit outside the door in them days, but they don't do that anymore either.
For the people, times have gotten better insofar as like conditions of houses and living conditions. But I think it's with great fondness that people my age would remember people like Daddy Curtis. We're up around the corner on a Saturday morning, I go over and I get the tripe. My grandmother would send me over for tripe for the dinner. And it's you know, it's all those childhood memories that I suppose in older age that we cherish.
You don't know who your neighbours are anymore. Everyone knew who their neighbours were years ago, and everyone helped one another. But now you don't know who your neighbours are. Most of the houses rented out, and people moving in and moving out, and moving in and moving out.
We had our children here, like, you know, we'd say to them, like, a day like today, maybe we'll go to Tramore tomorrow. Now that's be on the train. Maybe we'll go to Tramore tomorrow if it's nice, like, you know. And you get up and the next thing it might be kind of rainy. No, we can't go today. And they'll be standing at the door there looking down back. The blue sky is coming up Barrack Street. We'll go, we'll go.
That's Barrack Street.